Deep in the North American forests, in the lands occupied by the Algonquian people, there was a legend. During the cold winter months, in the darkness of the trees, lived a creature, a horned monster, toweringly tall, its desiccated skin stretched thin over its bony frame, skin as gray as ash and constantly emaciated. Roaming through the night, the terror of the Wendigo was ever present. Eternally tormented by hunger, the Wendigo prowled, looking for prey, but it was no ordinary predator, for the Wendigo ate men. Anyone roaming the North American forests needed to be wary. At least, that's how the legend went, and it was, after all, legend. Paleontology, the branch of science concerned with fossil animals and plants, a field of science born in the 1700s during the Age of Enlightenment, but practiced throughout human history. Paleontology did not emerge in a large scale in the United States until the 19th century, when government subsidies allowed for complete surveys for roads and canals. 10 years before the first North American dinosaur skeleton is completed, one Dr. Andrew Bell from Princeton University, along with his research team, discovered a strange set of bones in the northern forests of New Jersey. Unexplainably long limbs, a horned skull, and most interestingly, a humanoid hand several times larger than ours, with fingers over a foot in length. Bell and his team present their findings to various scientific organizations, but are largely dismissed. The fossils didn't match their limited but established understanding of the fossil record and weren't like any known organism structure. Bell advocated hard for further inspection, insisting that they must be the remains of a megafauna, or a similarly large terrestrial animal. But by and large, scientists chalk up the confusing nature of the fossils to poor methodology and mistaken classification. Bell disregarded the opinions of his peers and recorded his findings anyway, naming the mysterious creature Megatherium manus. Megatherium meaning beast, coming from the supposed megafauna genus, and manus meaning hand from the fossil's hand-like structure. Although not officially admitted into any official record or journal, all of Bell's personal records were stored in Princeton's special collections, where they sat, untouched, for over a century. The year is 1952. Two high school seniors named Thomas Waters and Bill Cook from Minnesota are midway through a particularly challenging hike during their summer break. On their hike, they find something worrying. The skeletal remains of a human, more specifically, a hand, but something's not quite right. It's large, too large for a normal person. Thomas decides to run into town while Bill stays with the hand. The local police are brought up, the case is soon handed over to the FBI, who quickly realize that this might not be the remains of a human being. A full excavation is conducted, and after just a few days, nearly a full skeleton is uncovered. A special research team is assigned to classify the mysterious organism, which is nicknamed Colossus. The mystery only grows as the skeleton is assembled. It is a bipedal vertebrate, one of few, yet has horns attached to its skull. It is toweringly tall, standing at 4.6 meters, yet the density of the fossils would not allow the skeleton to hold such a massive frame. And of course, it has hands. Nothing about the discovery makes sense. The discovery reaches national headlines as the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology names the organism the most curious and unexplainable fossil collection in the Western Hemisphere, perhaps the world. But the skeleton can't fit into any known genus and has no similarities with any other species, and no other remains have been found. After the buzz of the new discovery died down, the same inevitable conclusion was reached. It had to be a mistake. A member of the now defunct research team, Mary Lewis, is 7 years into a document deep dive, searching through hundreds of records to try and conclude the case. Federal funding dried up after the first 5 years, making any fieldwork practically impossible. But things never sat right with Lewis, who was now teaching at the University of Texas at Austin. She had always felt that the Colossus findings were never taken seriously enough. Writing in her personal diary, Critics of the Colossus findings fail to apply a serious scientific analysis to our findings. They are too easily dismissive, as any experienced paleontologist could easily point out the similarities in structure, the successful connection of the joints, and the radiometric dating showing us all of the pieces of the skeleton were fossilized at the same time, and so forth. Any so-called expert with a conflicting opinion is either unable or unwilling to utilize their expertise to formulate an accurate analysis. Lewis had spent the better half of a decade taking every opportunity she could to try and find out what exactly this mysterious creature was. In August of 1959, she travels to New Jersey to give a talk at Princeton University. At her time there, she discovers a series of documents with the title Megatherium Manus, Bell's Records. Lewis gathers the records and attempts to publish them, but is ignored by most scientific journals. She then gathers her and Bell's collective findings to try and secure funding for further research. She is ignored by every organization she approaches. All except for one. Shortly after, Mary Lewis retires from her position at the University of Texas and moves with her family to a cattle ranch in southern Australia, and the story of the mysterious skeleton Colossus is more or less forgotten entirely. Hello?
Hello?
Is this...
Yes, speaking. Look, some things came up. I don't think it's such a good idea to talk over the phone anymore. You can head over to... we can talk there.
You're about to hear an interview from a former employee at the Department of Defense. Considering certain safety concerns, they have asked to keep their identity anonymous. In addition, we were not permitted to bring a camera to the interview.
I was part of the Research Dictatoriate, Office of the Secretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. I was there from 1982 to 1991.
So as you know, we're here to talk about Project Donner. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Project Donner was a defense application research project started in '78. You know about the whole Colossus business, correct?
Yes.
So a little after all of that went down, more and more bones started showing up, and they decided to keep things under wraps after how out of hand the media attention got in the 50s.
They?
Yeah, the Department of Defense.
Why was the DoD involved in a paleontological examination?
Because of the Wendigo theories. There were some indigenous mythology nuts in the excavation teams, and at first, they weren't exactly that nuts, but after a little while, as the fossils made less and less sense, the crazy theories started to become a little realer and realer, and eventually became a defense concern. After all the bones matched all the folk story descriptions. You have to remember this was before satellite imaging. There's over 300,000 square miles of forest in the US, more so in Canada. It wasn't crazy to assume that one or two could still be out there, but if it was, it would be an organism that we know nothing about. The implications could have been severe. Back around in '82, one of the special research assignments managed to create an early version of molecular cloning. It was primitive and incredibly expensive. Nobody saw any real applications coming for a few decades. Everybody knew it was ages away from the commercial market, but a breakthrough is a breakthrough. So that year, it was just a research project with a lot of ground to cover before getting anywhere meaningful. But a few years later, the White House took notice of the project. And so Project Donner was born. Defense applications, they said. They wanted a new way to interfere with the communist governments without anybody being able to connect it back. After Nicaragua, the Reagan administration felt like they needed to be more secretive, but selling weapons and bribery left a paper trail. Turns out transporting the monster all the way to Latin America and Africa was logistically impossible. After a series of failed attempts, they gave up. But Reagan found a new use for it, fighting communism at home. So they deployed it stateside, next to a few communes. They were on a campaign to burn move to the ground.
There is a small war underway on a street in Philadelphia.
But after what happened in Philadelphia in '85, they couldn't risk the unrest. They wanted to get rid of the communists with the least amount of accountability, but in the '90s, they lost it. It's been roaming the countryside since. The only way we have any way of knowing where it is based on the disappearances.
On September 14th of 1992, in the small town of Warren, Pennsylvania, two girls, Sharon and Katie Williams, go missing after playing in a nearby creek not far from their family home. They were reported missing later that night. After 36 hours, a statewide manhunt is called. The manhunt lasts for 2 weeks before officials give up on the search. To this date, the two little girls have never been found. On December 27th of 1992, a trucker by the name of Brian Lee stops his 18-wheeler while taking a local route before he gets back on the highway near Pittsburgh. Police find his empty truck on the morning of the 28th, parked in the middle of the road, his hazard lights still blinking. His route shows that between his last exit and the next on-ramp was a 7-minute drive. So why did he stop? Lee apparently stopped in the middle of the night for no obvious reason, and then proceeded to completely abandon his giant rig. A missing persons case is opened. 16 hours later, the FBI takes the case over. 6 weeks after Brian Lee goes missing, one Vera Jackson is leaving after her long night shift at Majestic Diner and begins walking towards her vehicle, when she notices something strange. She looks out in the dark woods overlooking the road adjacent to the diner. There in the darkness, she sees what looks like a tree, but a tree that's moving, slowly and subdued, almost as if it was breathing. Jackson felt locked in place, totally engrossed by the dark tree line. Fear tremored throughout her whole body, but for some reason, she just couldn't move her feet. The cold air around her felt intense, piercing right through her thick winter jacket. It was the coldest cold she had ever felt, right down to her bones. It was more than painful. A putrid odor filled the air, and Jackson got more and more scared, until suddenly, she saw a flash of motion, and suddenly, she could move again. The freezing winter air felt warm against her face. Jackson hurriedly rushes to her car, locks the doors, and speeds off. As she drives away, she can't help but feel as if she's being watched. Vera Jackson reported this all to a New York Times reporter, Catherine Cho, 13 years after the incident. Cho had taken an interest after stumbling upon this image uploaded on New Year's Eve 2006 on the internet forum 4chan. Cho had traveled to western Pennsylvania shortly after, visiting the disappearance sites and talking to locals. It's in these interviews we find reports of confusion and frustration. The sudden appearance of federal agents didn't help. She had planned to stay there for a few weeks, maybe even a month, but just 8 days into her trip, her husband received this message from Cho at 3:43 a.m. That was the last time anybody had heard from her, and Cho's disappearance marked the 22nd person to go missing in Warren County, Pennsylvania, since 1992, a county of less than 40,000 people. Her personal records are the last recorded documents pertaining to our story. Later, we attempted to get back in touch with our DoD contact to pull further records. We never heard back. Since Cho's disappearance, an estimated 11 more people have gone missing without any immediately apparent cause in Warren County. Local concerns regarding safety have caused a mass emigration after the public outcries resulted in no government response. Every missing persons case reported from Warren County since '92 has been taken over by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, where they remain today, at the time of this recording, classified.